All right, today we are just going to go through a bunch of different examples of bureaucratic agencies. So we'll be going through a whole lot of examples here, and it's not important that you remember every detail of every one. Just want to be able to make sure that we can explain examples when asked. So today we will describe examples of bureaucratic agencies. This way we will be able to explain their policy-making roles. We are going to talk later about how bureaucratic agencies have policy-making power, and the most likely question that we are asked on the AP exam is to explain why and to explain examples of agencies doing so. So we're just going to go through a bunch of different agencies today and give little examples of what they do so that we can talk about the types of policy that they would have the power to make. First up is our independent regulatory agencies. These are the kind you are most familiar with. Most of the bureaucratic agencies we deal with are going to be independent regulatory agencies. We see a guy working from the EPA here. That's an example, our biggest example. And we are going to talk about the details these little agencies do so that we can talk about the little details of the laws that they are going to be able to make. All right, first up is the EPA. The Environmental Protection Agency. This is our largest regulatory agency. This was created in the 70s and does exactly what it sounds like. Its job is to protect the environment. They carry out all sorts of regulations passed by Congress. So some of the little things they do, they run programs for consumers. You might see something like Energy Star on like appliances you have at your house. So like they set guidelines for appliances and things like that. And they're going to implement regulations that Congress passes for things like clean air, clean water. They're going to be the scientists, the experts, so they're going to set the details of those policies made by Congress. The Federal Election Commission, the FEC. The Federal Election Commission, like it sounds like, regulates elections, regulates federal elections. So they're going to be enforcing laws in federal elections, and that includes things like campaign contributions, monitoring the spending of campaigns, making sure things like candidates don't spend campaign money on like furniture for their house and things like that. This one this one is a commission. That means instead of one person in charge, it's a group. And since it's elections, and that's an important thing, an important competition between the two parties, this commission is made up of 3 Republicans and 3 Democrats all the time. So they always have to agree on some kind of change in election policy here. You've probably heard of the FCC, that is the Federal Communication Commission. We're going to talk about them a lot later when we go through the media, but they regulate anything dealing with like radio, TV, satellite, cable. So this is another commission, and they're going to regulate communication over these mediums. So they like regulate some of the content that's on TV or radio. They're going to give licenses to radio, TV stations, things like that. Make sure that the stations that get to use the government's airwaves are treating political candidates fairly. If you've done economics already, you know the Federal Reserve. This is our central banking system in the United States. This one doesn't have like an acronym or anything. We just call it the Fed. But they have a board of governors that serves here. And here's the important thing about them. These guys are economic experts. They're appointed to take care of our economy. So you'll notice their terms are 14 years long. That's really super long. That means that the people on the board of governors, they're supposed to outlast the presidents. So like they don't have to worry about keeping the politicians happy. They worry about what's best for the economy in the long run. So we're going to end up talking about them a lot later when we get into economic policy. But this is an important regulatory agency to know because they're going to regulate all of the banking in the United States. And the Federal Trade Commission, another agency you might have heard of, they regulate trade, federal trade, like interstate commerce, right? So they're going to regulate businesses. They're going to promote things that help consumers, promote competition and things like that. One of the big things they do is they'll make decisions on which companies can merge, which companies have to be broken apart. So like if 2 giant companies, one's trying to buy another one, the FTC has to approve it to make sure there's enough competition to serve customers well and stuff like that. They're making decisions in the future on if Facebook has to break up and things like that. So they run all sorts of other little programs. They run things like Consumer Protection Bureau to help you in the event when companies make products that are not safe and things like that. They tell us all about it. All right, that's just a few independent regulatory agencies, enough for us to be able to come up with examples of what they are and what they do. We're going to switch over and talk about some cabinet departments. Now, we'll end up talking about a lot of these in depth later as we're going through the different functions of the government, but just to give a few examples of cabinet departments and the many things that they are responsible for. What you see here in the picture, this is the Pentagon. That is the building that houses the Department of Defense and all the like military offices and things like that. So this is an example of one of our cabinet departments. First up would be the State Department. The State Department handles all of our foreign policy stuff. This is our oldest cabinet department. They're gonna like do things like handle treaties and agreements, arrangements with like foreign countries and stuff like that. They do a lot of work like, in negotiating foreign relations between the governments of countries and stuff, but also they do a lot of work for us as citizens. Like the State Department issues passports. The State Department will assist you like when you're traveling in another country. Like the United States has embassies in all these other countries around the world. So like if anything happens, like you lose your wallet or something like that, the State Department helps you like get what you need to get home and all that kind of stuff. So the State Department deals with all of our foreign policy needs. Next up would be the Department of Defense. The Department of Defense, also one of our first agencies, very, very old. This is concerned with like security. So not like negotiating with other countries and stuff, but this is about securing the United States against threats and things like that. The Department of Defense, like we said, in the Pentagon, this is the biggest cabinet department in terms of employees, because think about how many people are in our armed forces. There are almost 3 million employees of the Defense Department alone. So this is very very, very big department. The Secretary of Defense is in charge of this department, and it's important in the United States. It is a law that the military is run by a civilian. So the Secretary of Defense, that's the person in charge of all the military. They cannot be an active military person. They must be retired for at least 7 years, so we can make sure that this is a civilian-run organization. And they have a lot of agencies under them that we'll end up talking about, like National Security Agency and things like that. But Defense Department, the Army, Navy, Air Force, all of our armed forces. The Department of Treasury handles the money for the United States in all sorts of different ways. So they manage the government's revenue, like bringing the money in through taxes. They run the IRS, which like collects the taxes, does all the paperwork and stuff like that. The Treasury Department also pays the bills for the government. So they handle the debt and all the like spending for the programs and things. They're going to give the president like advice about different things to do. But one of the other like, just funny things they do is they make decisions about like what the money is actually. So like, which bills do we have? They'll make the decisions about who's on the money and things like that. So all sorts of different little things run by the Department of Treasury. The Department of Justice is the next one up here. The Department of Justice does all like justice related topics. So they're dealing with like law enforcement all over the country at different levels, and also like the court system, since that's part of it here. So they have all kinds of agencies under them that we will deal with, like the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, the DEA. Those are law enforcement agencies, so they're in the Department of Justice. They have all the lawyers that are prosecution for the United States and defense of the United States. Like if you sue the United States for something, they monitor like local law enforcement agencies, like police forces and things like that. And this is the only one where we would not call this person the Secretary of Justice. This is the only one with a weird name. So when you hear the Attorney General, that's the person that runs the Department of Justice. So this is all the law enforcement in the country. Next up, the Department of the Interior. This is one, it does have my favorite logo. Look at that. That is a great logo. They deal with like all the land in a weird way here. So they manage all federal land, manage natural resources and stuff like that. They deal with all of the programs that deal with our indigenous people. So Native Americans, Native Hawaiians, Native Alaskans. They actually still have a bureau called like a sub office that they call the Bureau of Indian Affairs. 2021, but that's still the name of it here. What they do, one of the many things they do nationally is they do like the parks. So the like wildlife services, the national parks are all run by the Department of the Interior. If you go to a building that is like labeled a National Historic Place, that kind of thing is run by the Department of the Interior. So they take care of all of the like land inside the United States and some of the programs for the people there. The Department of Agriculture, exactly what it sounds like, deals with farming mostly. Not just farming, but like forestry and food and stuff like that. So it's not just like helping to like plan farming and all that stuff, but they also run programs dealing with food. So like the food stamp program is a part of the Department of Agriculture. They run agencies that help develop farms, that help develop like rural lands and stuff like that. And then they also deal with all of the like nutrition stuff for the United States. So like telling us like what goes in like the food pyramid and nutrition guidelines. Those all come down to the Department of Agriculture. The Department of Labor deals with labor. So think about workers, right? Remember the Department of Commerce we'll get to in a second. They'll deal with like the business side of things, but this is about the workers. So any of the programs that are out there to help workers, probably at your job, you have to deal with a lot of this stuff without even thinking about it. The way that like dangerous chemicals are labeled at your job and things like that, rules about how you guys can work as teenagers. There is somewhere at your job, there is a poster that gives you all these rules and stuff, and they're set by the Department of Labor. Things like the limits on hours for teenagers and all this kind of stuff. So they also like nationally, like they keep tabs on like people that are working and trying to get jobs. So they calculate the employment rate, the unemployment rate, and those kinds of things. Department of Commerce, they're going to be on the business side of things. So they promote economic growth, a little bit of economic planning. One of the things they are required to do every 4 years, every 10 years, every 10 years they handle the census. They also deal with copyrights and patents, trademarks, things like that, because the Congress is told in Article 1 they have to do that, so they've given that power to the Department of Commerce. But one of the, just handling economic growth and businesses. Department of Health and Human Services provides services to us as people, mostly about like all health related stuff here. This is one of the biggest departments. It doesn't have a ton of people working there, but it spends the most money because it runs Medicare. So this is like a huge insurance provider, as well as other things. They've got to insure all the old people. Medicaid insures all the people that can't afford health insurance or don't have access to it. They run other agencies like the Food and Drug Administration, like monitoring medicine research and things like that. Our newest cabinet department, the Department of Homeland Security, this one was created in 2002. This is created to protect the United States. Like, this is a little different than the Department of Defense. The Department of Defense does like the armed forces, the military. This is about actually like keeping the space, the land that is the United States safe. So not only all sorts of safety programs, like they run the TSA, the transportation security, like at airports and things like that. They run immigration, customs, like monitoring like things coming into the border and stuff like that. They also end up running like emergency management. So if there's a hurricane, stuff like that, FEMA is the agency that does it. So all the stuff they do ranges from like fighting terrorism to like fixing things after a natural disaster of some kind. Now, we did not go through all of the cabinet departments, but just touched on a few of them that would be important for us to be able to talk about as examples. All right, we're going to go through just a few examples of government corporations. You know what they do. You're pretty familiar with these because you would at least deal with the post office all the time. So here's one of our faithful mail carriers out there delivering mail to a mailbox, providing a service to U.S. citizens. So our first government corporation is the U.S. Postal Service. Very weirdly, this is one of all of the agencies we're going to talk about today. The U.S. Postal Service is one of the only ones that is actually in the Constitution, because Article 1 says that Congress has to establish and run the post office. They have a ton of employees, so this is the largest government agency that is not the military. They've got 600,000 employees. They have to treat all people the same regardless of geography. So like a company like FedEx, if you live out in the middle of nowhere, Alaska, or somewhere really far away, FedEx can say, sorry, we don't deliver there or whatever. But the U.S. Postal Service has to treat all citizens the same. So that means everybody gets mail delivered to their house and things like that. Like any government corporation, they are responsible for their own funding. So that means they have to charge you for these services, although they are very, very cheap. cheaper than they would be if you just paid for them on their own, because they get some of their budget from taxes and things. But you guys are pretty familiar with the U.S. Postal Service. Amtrak is another pretty basic government corporation. Long time ago in the 70s, the United States took over all of the passenger rail companies because they were kind of shutting down anyway. And so the United States runs the only passenger train service in the United States is Amtrak. Most of Amtrak, where it's successful, is in like the hugest cities. It like helps people travel from the suburbs into the city every day and stuff. Out here in the middle of the country, it's not as profitable, but this way the United States guarantees that this stuff still operates. So you can like get, like from Memphis, you can leave for New York or Chicago pretty cheaply. And it has, millions and millions of passengers every year. This is really an efficient way to travel in terms of resources used, better than cars or airplanes and stuff. And so this is an important service that the government provides. And this is like a government corporation. It is a service provided to citizens. But if you want to use it, just like any other transportation service, you've got to pay for like a ticket. The Tennessee Valley Authority, also a government corporation. They do what a business might do. They provide electricity. They sell it to regional electric companies around the Tennessee River Valley. This is the government's biggest regional planning agency. They operate dams and all this kind of stuff. They operate facilities that create electricity, and then they sell it to like local electricity companies, and we end up buying it from them. So same as any other type of electricity producing corporation. You might know the FDIC if you learned about this in history last year. It came up as part of the response to the Great Depression or whatever, but this provides insurance on the money that you put in banks. So this way you can feel safe putting money in banks because it's guaranteed by the United States government. So if you have up to $250,000 in the bank, if like something crazy happened at the bank, like they went out of business, lost all the money and stuff, the government would guarantee that you get that money back. So this is just an insurance company. So it's just like any other insurance company, but it is operated by the United States government. And finally, just so we've got another example here, not a really important one to know, but one of our less popular ones here. You probably never heard of Unicor. Unicor is actually a company called Federal Prison Industries. So this is prison labor. This is a program for inmates that doesn't cost taxpayers anything because it generates money. Inmates are like people that are in federal prisons. They are given like some job training. They're paid a small wage to do these things. Mostly they make goods for like other government agencies and stuff like that. So people are offered jobs for Unicor where they can earn a wage. If they don't want to work for Unicor, they're given some other job at the prison if they're physically able. But this is, it's a government corporation because it is a business. It does what a business does. It produces goods, but is operated by the government. All right, finally, we will talk about the independent executive agencies. Remember, this is the group that's just everything else. So there's just a few handful of agencies here that we'll talk about so that we make sure we've got examples to use. The first and most obvious one we've talked about before would be NASA, National Aeronautic and Space Administration. They are a space research program. They explore space. They have, sent astronauts. We've explored the moon, things like that. And they do a bunch of research on science. And so it doesn't really fit into any of the other categories. That's why we call this an independent executive agency. The CIA is another one. This is an intelligence service. They gather information. They handle a lot of national security stuff, but they're not really like a law enforcer. They don't really fit into any of these other categories because what they do is they collect intelligence about what's going on in different countries all around the world, like spy kind of stuff here. And so this is one of our weird agencies. Doesn't really fit into any other category. This is the only agency in the country that is allowed to carry out their actions in secret. So like by law, they have protections to like keep some things secret so that they can spy effectively. Another one we've talked about, the General Services Administration. I basically call them the landlord of the government. They deal with like managing the buildings, the offices, sometimes like the monuments and stuff like that. They literally take care of everything from, in some cases, building the buildings or buying the space or whatever, put upkeep of the buildings. They have to do supplies like changing all the light bulbs, handling all the like government-owned cars and things like that. So a government agency that just operates all of the government's buildings across the country. Another weird government agency, but like you are probably familiar with it. You can help use it as an example. Maybe the National Archives. They preserve historical records and artifacts for the United States. They've got the original Declaration of Independence and the Constitution and things like that. They have run a big museum. They publish the like acts of Congress and the president and all that kind of stuff. The National Archives is basically kind of like a museum of America's special documents, and they keep all these things safe and keep them maintained and restore things and all that. And, it doesn't really fit into any of those categories, but is an important government agency. So that's why we would call this the Independent Executive Agency. Last one, just kind of random, but I throw it in there because I think you've heard of it. The Smithsonian Institution. It's just a system of museums. They run museums across the country. A lot of them are in D.C. They run the National Zoo. The Smithsonian museums are free because they are a government service. Like, you provide the funding for these when you pay taxes and stuff. So the Smithsonian does museums. They operate a TV channel and all this kind of stuff. And they are, run by the government. And so that helps us to, have some educational service provided by the state here. All right, you are probably sad as these babies are that we don't get to learn about any more bureaucratic agencies today, but that is it. Time to go through our bigly ideas and make sure we understand why we would need to know these different agencies. So here's the deal. You have learned about the different types of agencies already, and you know like what the roles of an independent regulatory agency or a cabinet department are. The reason we would go through these specific ones today, and why we'll talk about the lawmaking powers that they have later, is because that's what we're going to be asked about in like a FRQ question. They're going to ask us, why would an agency have lawmaking power instead of Congress? And we're going to be able to talk about how Congress knows that that nutrition standards need to be created so that people know what they should eat. But congressmen don't have any idea what a healthy diet is, so we leave that to like the nutritionist in the Department of Agriculture and things like that. So no real specific stuff here, but just you need to make sure that you know a few of each type of agency that you'd be able to make up examples about things that they do. All right, that's it. Really just kind of seems like a long list of agencies here. And again, it's not important that you remember every single detail of what we talked about today, but you want to find a few agencies that you are familiar with and that you are comfortable with and be able to explain what they do and why they do that. We're going to move on and talk about how agencies have policy making power and why they were given that power.